In 2007, 3-year-old Madeleine McCann disappeared from a Portuguese resort. She was left alone in her room with only her teddy bear, and no one saw her again that night. Years later, clues emerged, and the case became one of the world's largest and most mysterious missing persons cases. Before you begin the story, be sure to subscribe to uncover buried truths, because some names should never be forgotten. Willowbrook, Maine-Letten and Cusian Sackenberg Casabades, 3000 Nufis, Tech on a Cat. Herkes and Herkesi Tonid Cure. 1996 Sambarinda Casabada Garrett Berhuzersis Luke Vardik. O Yil Kasaba Ekonomisi Ketiadk. Anna Iverin along Karis Fabrikasi Kapan Kak. And Sandler is Isdi. Jankler Buyik Ziherler Kiki Yordu. 15 Kasam 1996. Kumaja Chesi. Kasabada Bekleminik Berlazing Chiri Balik. Ilkum Sot 2130 to Gurkek Lefty. Robert Hayes. 45 Yawinda. Eski Fabrika Ikisi. Evan and Garajinda Asili Bulandu. Karisi Alan Eve Geldawin Bulmuktu. Inaharno 2 Yok to Data Saat 20 to 15 to Kinchiom. Mary Johnson, 38 Yawinda. Okal Ekramini. Evan and Banyosinda. Baleklarini Kesma. Kinkabin Dingomika. Comcusu Alarm Verity. Sa 20 to 45 Kikinskilm. David Palmer. 50 to Yawinda. Euro Bankik. Arabasin Inikind. Carbon monoxide Zairlin Macy. Garage to Motor Calicar Haldady. Bunak Tatapolis Alarm Verdi. Comiser Jack Morrison, 25 Ulik Tech Rubelli Polis. Butesov Fulamaz Dedi. Annie Jasiv 3 Inahar. Sot 2330 to Dirtinku. Elm. Patricia Williams, 29 Yawinda. Hemwire. Evan and Mutfikinda. Axari Doz Alak. Bo Alak Shilair Yan and Dadi. GCR Sina Yak and Biwinchium. Thomas Anderson, 41 Yawinda. Tamirchi. Evan and Badram Katinda. Electric Cart Mask. Arzal Cablo Grumandetti. Sot 045 Altincombe. Linda Martinez, 33 Yawinda, Berber. Evan and Yadik Odasinda. Yastikla Bakyolmek Gabiti. Kapia Karadan Kilatliti. Sot 115 Yadinchium. Michael Torres, 39 Yawinda, Kifsi. Aharinda. Kafasana Kirchasim Dukunk. Kazagibi Jaranurdu. Sot 2 o'clock D Sekazinchivi Sunom. Jennifer Brooks, 26 Yawinda, Kudafonachi. Kaprudin Atlantic. Mihir Bolandu. Tanik Yaktu. Sabaha Kader 8 Kiwi Gomika. Hepsi Farkli Kekelerd. Hepsi Kenny Evlerind. Vea Yakingta. Comiser Morrison Hayatinda Bale Burzi Germamikti. 8 Kiwi Ani Jasid Nasl Inahar Eder. Disuri or Dusarekli. Emma and Selamlergi Sterdi Ki. Hepsi Inahargabiti. Zorlil Durham Izzy Yaktu. Mukadel Izzy Yaktu. Sinayet Dalili Yaktu. FBI Devrai Gertie. Agent Sarah Collins Buvakike Aldi. Collins. Sari Sinayet Usmanitic. Amabu Vaka Farklitic. Buin Sandleri Gulder and Kimsi Yaktu. Dedi Collins. Hepsi Kendi Candinial Dermk. Amanidin. Collins. Ellen Key Wheeler and Hayatlarini Insuletti. Arla Rinda Ordek Nocta Reardu. Robert Hayes Evli to Coca-Clu. Molly Problemi Vardik. Deprezian Gekmi Hiwayo Kata. Mary Johnson. Becker. Kakuksus. Savdichi Iani Yapi Ordu. Mutlugabiti. David Palmer. Bawank 1 Coca-Clu. E. Durham the Burbankik. Inahar Sabibi Yaktu. Patricia Williams, Evli. Yeni Dokmuk. Babewi Vardik. Haydn and N. Mutlu Dunaman Dadi. Thomas Anderson, Becker. Ilesi Azokta. Sasai al Mic Danik Beardy. Linda Martinez. Nyanok. To A. Sonra, Evelyn Asekti. Dukan Hazar Laklari Yapi Ordu. Michael Torres, Evli. 3 Coca-Clu. Kifliki E. Giddy Ordu. Soren Yok. Jennifer Brooks, Becker, Kidab Sever, Sakim Beardy. Kimzil Sarunu Yaktu. Collins Ordik Nocta Bulamak. 8 Kiwi Damam and Farkli Yawam Tars Larina Sahipti. RL Arena Baklank Gurn Yordu. Autopsy. Rapper Lari Dog Garib Sonicler Verdi. Hepsin and Kaninda Yuksek McTarda Serotonin Vardik. Udaprezi and Alachin and Kasidi. Amabu Kiwheeler and Deprezi and Alachi Cullen Kna Der Kate Yaktu. Nasl Kanlarna Gekmidi. Collins Kasabadaki Echene Contral Eddy. Dr. Elizabeth Chen. Yerel Etchik. Buki Wheeler and Hick Byrene Antidepressant. Reweed et Madim Dedi. Piki Baka Nirdan Al Meek Olablurler. Dr. Chen Duwinda. Iligalia Larak. Yada Baka Byrenden. Collins Afelandi. Barisi Bu and Sandler Alak for Mimidi. Collins Kasabadaki Dr. Lari Sorkulata. Dr. James. Wilson, Tech Pratisian Doctor. O Dabu Kiwailer Antidepressant Yaz Madam Dedi. Piki Kim Yaz Mikolabular. Dr. Wilson Teradit Eddy. Geekane Kasabai Yeniber Dr. Geldi. Dr. Marcus Reed, Belkio Yazmikter, Collins Dr. Readable Maya Kaliksk, Emma Adam Ortaden, Cable Muktu, Kasabay Ageldiwi Gun Bile Kimsi Haderlam Yordu Temalarik, Dr. Reedy Tanier Musunus, Dysor Du Kasaba Hakana, Kokwas Mini Didam Emma Germanum Deerdu, Bugarapiti, Kakasabada Herkser Kesi Tanark, Emma Dr. Reed Hayalletten Didok Collins, Redan Kalchkir Oldu Salen and Moteli Contraleti, Motel Sahibi Yalber Dr. Kalmad Birada Didi, Collins Redan Tipla Sanskan Contraleti, Bailber Dr. Yaktu, Marcus Reed Sotber, Isimdi, Barisi Sot Dr. Kim Litsi Kulinarik Kasabaya Gelma Dedi Collins, 8 Ki Yalak for me, Sonar Cable Moke, Amanidin, Bakiwai Larnidin Zer Ar Vermik Istamikti, Collins Baka Ordik Nokdorati, 8 Kiwi Arasinda Baka Baklank, Alabular Midi, 1996 Kasamayan Uroderdik, O Dinim Kasabata Ni Aliordu, Karis Fabrikasi Kapung Kok, Amma 8 Kiadin Sades to see Fabricata Klikiordu, Beladai Sequimlari Yaklikiordu, Amma 8 Kiwi Farkli Partalurdan Oiveriordu, Yenibur Yul Progesi Tarchkiliordu, Amma, Kanula Iljili Gurk Balertan Yaktu, Collins Kagmazagurdi, Bu 8 Ki Hedef Alamber Sebep Yaktu, O Sarata Kamizer Morrison Enimli Berzi Haderlata, 14 Kasim Jet Chesi Kasabata Bertop Lank Kiapel Miktik, Ni Top Lanksi, Kasaba, Kansay Top Lanksi, Yeni Projler Tarch Klaket, Collins Top Lank Tatanaklaran Istidi, Amakayat Yaktu, Tutnak Tutelmamikt, Kimmler Vardik Top Lantita, Morrison Haderlamaya Kaliksk, Kessin Haderlamiorum, Amma Kalabalktik, 50 to 60 Kiwi Vardik, Collins, Top Lantia Catalanler Listasini Yap Maya Kaliksk, Kasaba Hakana Sordu, Burkok Kiwi Ben D Vardkum Dedi, Amma Kim Si Tam Lis Vermeer Du, and on M Lisi, Ellen 8 Kian and Hepsi Butaplani Dadik, Butek Ordik No Toleritic, Top Lantita Ni Kona Kuldu, Dysor Du Collins, Yeni Fabriker Progesi Vardik, Dedi Barisi, Hayer, Yul Progesi Kona Kuldu, Dedi Baka Biri, Okelbut Kesi Tarchkildi, Dedi Kukinsk, Herkus and Anlatak Farklitik, Sanki Kimsi Gurkikton Din Lamemikti, Collins Afelandi, Batop Lantita Gurkikton Neol Mutu, More Sona Sordu, Top Lanti Kimyanetti, Beladai Bakink, James Carter, Collins Carteribuldu, Adam Kok Gergen Jarniurdu, 14 Kasim Top Lant Sinda Ni Konatunus, Daiso or Du. Carter Teradit Eddy, Normal Conular, Baki, Progler, Specific Alaricni, Carter Kokomics of Opler Verity, Haderlami Ormtam Alaric, Collins Anlatic, Carter Yalen Sali Ordu, 8 Kiwi D Butaplani Datic, Tesavmol, Carter, Dao Da Gergen Lefty, Bilmim, Kalabok Bertop Lantitic, Collins Baka Katilim Sklar Sorgulata, Kirks Farklik Sailor Anlatai Ordu, Yada Hik Haderlam Yordu, Bugarapiti, 20 for Sot on Seki Top Lanti Kimsi Haderlam Yordu, Collins Top Lant Kirini Contral Eddy, Beladai Binasinkan Conference Salonidu, Salonis Kayat Sistemi Vardik, Collins Kayat Lari Istidi, OG's Kayat Alan Madk, Dedi Beladai Secretary, Nidin, System Bazuktu, Collins Afelandi, Her, Zikaku Gundu, Tudanak Yak, Kayat Yak, Kimsi Haderlamir, Osarata Enamli Britannic Buldu, Lisa Murphy, Michael Torreson Carisi, Oda Toplani Dadik Emma Alma Mikti, Lisa, 14 Kasim Toplants and Haderlier Musun, Lisa Tai Tremai Balik, Haderlamiorum, Hikberzi, Nasl Haderlamazan, Kakakan Orada Eld, Lisa Aklamaya Balik, Lutfan Sorma, Hikberzi Haderlamiorum, Collins Anlatic, Lisa Korkuyordu, Amanidin, Lisa, Banaguvan Billerson, Kokangul Trudaldu, Gurkwi Bulmaya Kalikiorum, Lisa Bawing Salatic, Michael Intihar Eddy, Baka Akaklama Yak, Collins Lisai Ikna at Michaeliksk, Amma Katan Kanuk Muyordu, OG's Collins Otelland, Du Winda, Bukasabada Buyik Bursur Vardik, 14 Kasim Topland Sinda Burzil Mutu, Vibu 8 Kiwi Bunan Ikengul Mika, Amanil Mutu, V Kim Yapmikt, Collins Burzi Dawa Farketi, Kasabada 9, Kiwi D Vardik OG's, Amma Oalma Mikti, Anna Foster, 31 Yawinda, Ekrepman, Oda Toplani Dadik, Amma Evine Govnalding 2, Collins Anayibuldu, Katan Kok Korkunk 2, Anna 14 Kasim Toplans and Haderlier Musun, Anna Dondu, Benno Toplantita, Dejeldim, Amma Tanikler Sini Gerdk, Anna Bawing Salatic, Yanlik Kiwi Al Character Mikler, Collins Anlatic, Anna Da Yalen Sali Ordu, Buhay Kanan Asil Trikyani, Kimsi Gurkwi Silami Ordu. And it was at this point that the story began to grow. Because this wasn't just a missing child case. The eyes of the international press were on the small town. The British government stepped in. Thousands of volunteers printed posters. And the entire world began to wonder about the fate of 3-year-old Madeleine. That night, dozens of adults dining at a table 50 meters away may have been blind to the tragedy unfolding before their eyes. And from then on, every detail, every minute, would become the subject of debate for years to come. As Kate's scream echoed off the stone walls of the resort, the peaceful evening at the Ocean Club suddenly descended into chaos. It was 10:05 p.m. Tables in the restaurant overturned. Vacationers asked each other questions. Some ran in panic. A few members of the group rushed into rooms and ran through the corridors. But each step resulted in the same truth. Madeleine was missing. Within minutes, hotel staff were on alert. Receptionists scoured the grounds with flashlights. Some vacationers ran toward the beach. Others wandered around the pool area. The playground, the parking lot, the side streets, everywhere was searched. But no sound or trace of Madeleine was found. Seconds seemed like hours for the family. Kate, through tears, repeated the same sentence over and over. They took her. Someone took her. Was this a mother's instinct or a panicked thought? Around 11 p.m., the police were finally called, but the Portuguese police were slow to arrive at the scene. The first team to arrive that night was few in number, and their experience was insufficient for such a critical missing persons case. No one reminded them of the need to preserve evidence. Dozens of people entered the room, touching the bed, pulling the curtains, and looking through the windows. Fingerprints were erased. Potential footprints were distorted. These initial mistakes would be the biggest turning point, still remembered with what-ifs years later. Meanwhile, Jane Tanner told her group of friends about the scene she'd seen. That evening, a slender man carrying a pajama-clad child in his arms under a streetlight. No one had paid attention at the time, but now this detail took on a chilling dimension. The child Jane described resembled the pink and white pajamas worn by Madeleine. The police took note of this information, but were slow to draw a detailed portrait. The sketch drawn days later was very general, a tall, thin-faced man with brown hair. Such a description could fit hundreds of people. Yet, it was the only eyewitness account from that night. The search continued until morning. Not all exit points from the village were checked, and border crossings were not immediately notified. Vacationers began printing leaflets at their own expense, but every minute diminished the young child's chances of survival. By morning, newspapers in Portugal and England had headlines: "English girl missing in Praia da Luz." Her photograph, with its innocent gaze, had entered every home dot by the end of the first day. Official scenarios began to be discussed. The first was that Madeleine had been abducted. The open window, Jane's testimony, and Kate's first words supported this scenario. The second possibility was that the child had left the room on her own and disappeared. But the question of where a 3-year-old child could have gone alone in the middle of the night remained. The third possibility was the most shocking. A family member or someone close to the family was involved. Police quickly added this possibility to the file. Statistically, most missing children are questioned only by their immediate family. At this point, the McCann family was under a heavy burden. Press cameras were trained on their faces. Every tear, every look, every word was scrutinized and debated. Why did they leave the children alone? The question was frequently asked. The restaurant was 50 meters away, but that distance was enough for a child to disappear. Some newspapers in England accused the family of negligence. Others supported them. A momentary mistake shouldn't have such a heavy price to pay. Both interpretations were painful for the family, because for them, there was only one truth. They had a missing child, a missing daughter. Police arrived at the scene and noted certain details in the room. There were no obvious footprints on the outside of the window. This suggested that the window had been opened from the inside, but these marks weren't properly documented. Furthermore, the bed linens appeared to be in good condition. If someone had forcibly removed the child, further confusion would have been expected. These details further raised questions. No results were produced in the first 48 hours. Police questioned hotel staff. Some acted suspiciously, but there was no definitive evidence. Accounts from vacationers conflicted. Some reported seeing a strange man at 9:30 p.m. Others saw no one at all. The townspeople were uneasy, because such an incident in a small, quiet resort village shattered everyone's sense of security. Meanwhile, special teams were dispatched from England. The international press flocked to the scene. The hotel surroundings had become a media camp. Hundreds of photos were taken daily, every detail magnified. The McCann family tearfully pleaded, "Help us find Madeleine." But this plea also brought them into the spotlight. They were portrayed as grieving parents and potential suspects. This dilemma grounded the case in a controversy that would last for years. The first week of Madeleine's disappearance passed like this. Every day brought a new tip, a new theory, a new hope, but all to no avail. The room was empty. The window was open. The curtain fluttered, and the little girl was gone. The police's handling of the investigation created a huge rift between the family and the authorities from the very beginning. The McCanns were convinced their daughter had been abducted, but in the early days, the police, especially the Portuguese detectives, were much more focused on the possibility of an accident. The little girl could have woken up during the night and gone out, fallen at a nearby construction site, or walked into the sea. This theory outraged the family. Madeleine wouldn't have gone out into the dark alone, Kate said. She would have been frightened, and the fact that the door was left open from the outside suggests something else. Things got even more complicated when the British police got involved. The detectives from the UK noted their Portuguese colleagues' negligence, but they also issued statements in the media defending the family. This effectively divided the investigation into two camps. The press's biggest selling point at the time was to direct suspicion towards the family. "They're so cool," headlines ran. Even the fact that Kate had no tears on her face in the photos made headlines. "She's playing the mother role too formally," comments were made. Kate, however, was a withdrawn character who constantly prayed to stay afloat. The police had several eyewitnesses. One woman said she saw a man carrying a child wrapped in a blanket on the road near the resort around 10 p.m. The child's blonde hair caught her attention, but the witness testimony came late, and no other corroborating evidence was found. Another neighbor claimed to have seen a strange car headlight that night, but she couldn't recall the license plate or model. Such statements add more fog than certainty. It was at this point that Kate's famous words were recorded. "They've taken her." That phrase made headlines repeatedly in the press. Was it a maternal instinct, or something more? Some newspapers wrote, "The mother knew from the very beginning that there was a kidnapping because she knew." These implications divided the McCann family in the public eye. Those who pitied them, and those who suspected them. As time went on, the police painted an increasingly complex picture. First, there were no signs of forced entry in the house. Neither the door nor the window had been broken. This raised the possibility that someone familiar inside might have opened the door. Furthermore, the group's system of taking turns checking the children created a significant security vulnerability. The press asked the parents, "Do you think it's responsible to leave the children alone?" This question was intended more to cast a shadow over the audience's mind than to incriminate the parents. Another suspicion arose, as in the Gary Mathias case, when different witnesses shared their stories. A taxi driver said that early the next morning, he had 3 children and 2 adults in the backseat, and that one of the children resembled Madeleine. However, the statement remained unsubstantiated. In a town packed with tourists, the possibility of misidentification was high. Despite the press onslaught, the family tried to expand their campaign. Madeleine's face appeared on bus stops, newspaper pages, and television programs across Europe. The slogan "Find Madeleine" reached millions, but each new day brought new suspicion and gossip. The family was searching for their daughter, while simultaneously trying to prove their innocence. This double burden began to wear them down, both physically and mentally. Another point the police highlighted was the small garden at the corner of the house. Some reported that the ground there appeared to have been slightly dug up. Detectives brought a dog to the area. One of the dogs stopped at a certain spot and barked. This was leaked to the press as something buried in the garden. However, nothing was later found. But rumor overtook reality. Everyone now asked the same question: was the child there? While the British press increasingly defended the family, the Portuguese press published increasingly harsh articles. This undermined the impartiality of the investigation. Public opinion was divided: those who claimed Madeleine was kidnapped, and those who claimed the family is responsible for what happened to Madeleine. One of the most bizarre details recorded in the file was the words of a worker at a construction site opposite the apartment building. The man claimed that days earlier, a strange man had been walking around the same area, watching the children from a distance, as if watching them. A description was made, but no one matching her name was found. This was just one of hundreds of small details that entered the case file, but remained open-ended. And amidst all this, what was truly lost wasn't just a little child, but the truth itself. Each witness account contradicted the other. Each clue raised a new possibility. The family woke each day with hope, but each night they fell asleep with unanswered questions. As police reports thickened, public trust thinned, and the questions still lingered. What happened to Madeleine after 10 p.m. that night? If someone had taken her, who? And how come an entire resort, dozens of tourist employees, neighbors, none of them saw a single clear thing? Dacia Bayek, Amasevap Kukuldu. Ale, her yeni gunn musais get armasini my ordu. Ama musais degil, kufbuya yordu. The police case had now gained international weight. The Portuguese police were under pressure from failing to find any leads. Even weeks after the incident, the British government intervened, and private investigators and officials with ties to the Metropolitan Police were deployed, but instead of cooperation, escalating tensions emerged. The Portuguese police were saying, "You don't trust us," while the British countered, "Your steps are slow and careless." The media escalated this conflict, while headlines in England asked, "Are the Portuguese police competent?" The Portuguese press accused the British of arrogance. Caught in the middle were the McCann family. They had to appear before the cameras daily. Kate, her eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, kept hearing the same question in front of the microphones. Where is Madeleine? Trying to answer an unanswerable question over and over again was exhausting. It was during this period that the first serious suspects emerged. Robert Murat, who lived in the neighboring apartment, was questioned for allegedly behaving suspiciously. Some witnesses said they had seen him around the hotel on the night of the incident. Murat was taken into custody, his home was searched, and his computer and phones were seized. The press was screaming, "First suspect found," but the evidence wasn't sufficient. Murat was soon released, but the shadow hanging over him never lifted. Another eyewitness reported seeing a dark-colored car near the hotel that night. Another claimed to have seen a man carrying a child in pajamas outside Madeleine's room. The descriptions were inconsistent. In one case, the man was brunette, in another, blonde. One said the car was an Opel, the other a Renault. The investigation grew more complicated with each tip. For the family, every testimony represented a new ray of hope. One day, Kate whispered to reporters who came to the house, "Someday, someone will tell the truth. Maybe they're scared now, maybe they're silent now, but one day, someone will speak." These words made headlines. With the headline, "A mother's heart still holds hope." But that same evening, a Portuguese newspaper ran a headline, asking, could the family be suspects? The contradictions compounded the tragedy. Police reports increasingly revealed more and more bizarre details. It was claimed that the window in the room had been opened from the outside, but there were no fingerprints on the glass. The door lock hadn't been broken, and there were no signs of a struggle inside the room. Madeleine seemed to have vanished, without a trace. This led the Portuguese police to turn their attention to the family. Perhaps something happened inside, they suggested. British police, however, disagreed, saying, "It's easy to blame the family when we have nothing." And it was during this period that the case transformed from an ordinary missing persons case into a riddle that captivated the entire world. Newspapers, television channels, and radio programs covered the case daily. The Algarve region, where the hotel was located, was no longer a place for vacations but a hub for disappearances. People came to the hotel, took photos, and prayed in front of the room. But amidst all this noise, one question remained persistently alive. Where was Madeleine taken that night? Was the room door unlocked? Did the witness who claimed to have seen a man actually see one? Or was it a trick of his tired eyes? And most importantly, what detail had the police overlooked, knowingly or unknowingly? By the end of this episode, everyone watching the case agreed. The official investigation was going off the rails. Overwhelmed by the situation, the police were either turning to the family or relying on random testimony. And amidst all this chaos, there was still no trace of little Madeleine. The family hung new posters on the billboard in front of their door. Hundreds of thousands of flyers were distributed, and her face appeared again and again on television programs about missing children. But the smiling face in the photograph carried hundreds of unanswered questions. From this point on, Madeleine's disappearance would become one of the most talked about mysteries not only in Portugal, but throughout the world. And the case was poised to plunge into even greater darkness. Jane Tanner's testimony, while seemingly a turning point in the investigation, presented numerous contradictions. Around 9:15 p.m. on May 3rd, Tanner described seeing a man carrying a child in his pajamas as he walked past the apartment complex. She described the child's pajamas as light pink in color, a remarkably similar look to the ones Madeleine had worn that night. For the press, this was tantamount to witness to the abduction found. British newspapers ran headlines the next morning, Madeleine seen being carried. Sketches were drawn, and those sketches were published across the country. However, Portuguese police viewed this testimony with caution, as other witnesses and The area around the same time had given different descriptions. One couple described the man carrying the child as blonde. Another vacationer claimed the man was actually thin and looked very different from Tanner's description. One person reported that a white van had stopped briefly at the same spot, with the man inside peering out. Another report, near midnight, of a dark-colored sedan speeding away, was even included in the file. As a result, there were completely different descriptions within the same time frame. Police reports were overflowing with suspects: a tall man, a blonde man, a white minivan, a gray sedan. They couldn't all be true at the same time. The press further compounded this confusion. One day, headlines read white van kidnapped, while the next, news reports read sedan seen in car. These contradictions only multiplied the public's lingering questions. For the McCann family, these reports represented both hope and devastation. Each new clue spurred them on, then led to contradictions. Kate and Jerry spent days tracking down various witnesses. Private investigators from England transcribed eyewitness accounts in detail and prepared facial sketches, but no drawings were alike, and no timeline matched perfectly. The Portuguese police, meanwhile, began to focus more on the family's behavior. They specifically noted Kate's initial utterance: "They've taken her," in their report. For the police, this raised the question: why would a mother be so certain she'd been kidnapped in that split second? For Kate, it was merely a glimpse of intuition, but the press dwelled on the statement for weeks. While British newspapers agreed with the mother, the Portuguese press, with its comments about too quick a judgment, contributed to the family's perceived suspicion. At this point, public opinion was divided. In Britain, body language experts were appearing on television programs to interpret the McCann's behavior, some calling it trauma, others suggesting concealment. In Portugal, the situation was even more stark. The local press and police were more open about regarding the family as suspects. This led to an invisible tension between the two countries. Amidst all this controversy, cars became one of the biggest mysteries in the case. One witness saw a white minivan, another described a gray Opel, and a third described a dark-colored Renault. British detectives ran the registration records of these vehicles, but either the license plates were incorrect or no matches were found. Thus, every foreign vehicle driving the town streets became a potential suspect. The media further dramatized the case, while the Portuguese investigation centered on the abduction throughout the summer. As months passed and no concrete clues emerged, attention increasingly shifted to the possibilities within the apartment. The shift was sparked by the inclusion of two specially trained dogs brought from England in the Praia da Luz search. These dogs, one responding to the scent of a cadaver, the other to the scent of blood, alerted the area around the sofa and the closet in apartment 5A of the apartment complex. In later days, they also alerted the trunk of the car the McCanns had rented weeks after their vacation. When these images leaked to the press, Portuguese newspapers ran headlines reading "Dogs detect corpse scent." In England, the prevailing commentary was that a dog alert isn't evidence, it only provides a clue. Public opinion was divided, and for the first time, a shadow of suspicion loomed over the family at the center of the narrative. Police at this stage viewed the DNA results from the samples sent to the laboratory as potentially game-changing, but as reports arrived, the situation became more complex. Samples collected from various points in the apartment and the rental car contained mixed profiles, accompanied by cautionary notes about low-copy DNA interpretations, statistical uncertainties, and the possibility of contamination. These technical details weren't included in the press headlines. The pages featured narratives that were either found or nothing. Official documents, however, pointed to no clear conclusion. Amidst these uncertainties, a lengthy interrogation was scheduled for Kate McCann. The police repeatedly asked dozens of questions, including, "When did you last see Madeleine? Did you leave the window open? And why did you say abduction in the first place?" Kate answered some, but chose not to answer others on the advice of her lawyer. The next day, Portuguese newspapers carried the headline "Mother Leaves Questions Unanswered." The headline in England was "Desperate Police Turn Pressure on Family." The same incident had become to different stories into countries, and the truth itself was lost in the noise. By autumn, Portuguese authorities officially declared Kate an arguido suspect. A similar status was being discussed for Jerry. This move sent shockwaves through the UK. Some of the people who had unconditionally supported the couple for months began to utter sentences, beginning with "what if" for the first time. Meanwhile, those who stood by the family interpreted the arguido decision as an attempt to compensate for insufficient evidence with political pressure. Within days, television debates, columns, and forums were sharply divided, those claiming kidnapping and those hinting at a domestic tragedy. Amidst these debates, It became difficult to follow the facts calmly. The statements of the group of friends known as Tuppa 7, the coincidence of time between restaurant and room checks, the interpretation of the marks on the window, the lock and door issue, the apartment's interior layout, every detail, could be interpreted differently by different experts. According to one expert, the dust on the window undermines the possibility of an opening from the outside, while another argued that the surface behavior could not be interpreted this way. One team declared, there are no preliminary signs of a burglary, while another claimed, silent entry through a window is possible, instead of following a single path. The investigation began to resemble a constantly branching forest. The family's psychological burden intensified at this stage. If they cried in front of the cameras, they were labeled acting, and if they remained calm, they were labeled cold. Kate's line, "They've taken her," has been quoted since the very beginning, with some commentators labeling it "I'll leave" at a suspiciously fast pace. However, reactions in the moment of trauma don't follow a linear pattern. Psychologists have repeatedly emphasized that categorizing them as expected behavior is unscientific. Nevertheless, societal judgment doesn't proceed with scientific caution. Especially when a child goes missing, people want to quickly fill the void in their minds. The tension between the British and Portuguese press spilled over into officialdom. Every question asked at press conferences triggered to distinct political and cultural debates in both countries. While British detectives called for "let's work together, let's simultaneously pursue alternative hypotheses," the Portuguese side complained that the file is being leaked, witnesses are being influenced, and the media is poisoning the investigation. In this climate, a reconstruction plan failed to mature. Everyone wanted completeness, but everyone's definition of completeness varied. The public campaign also began to suffer. The donor and volunteer network, initially united under the banner "Find Madeleine," began to split as discussions of suspicion grew. One group demanded more announcements, more rewards, while another began asking, is the use of the money transparent? The family explained that the accounts had been audited and that the funds were earmarked for the purpose of finding the missing child. Nevertheless, messages circulated on social media and forums, some of which contained clearly unfounded accusations. Legal warnings, retractions, and corrections followed suit. Amidst this storm, the most critical fact in the case remained unchanged. Madeleine was still missing. If she had been abducted by a stranger, the alerts provided by private dogs might have misdirected the investigation, eroding the original trail. If a domestic accident had occurred and been concealed, then public resources were pursuing a false narrative. Both possibilities were painful. In both cases, the child was nowhere to be found by the end of the night. Months later, as the Arguido status debate continued, the Portuguese prosecutor's office began issuing statements implying that the case in its current state could not be brought to trial. The British side emphasized the cautionary notes in the laboratory reports, saying, "Let's not interpret mixed DNA profiles as definitive evidence." While the public outcry drowned out the technical details, the gist was this: this was not a black and white case. There were many shades of gray. Finally, the question boiled down to a single sentence: if dog alerts, ambiguous DNA, and inconsistent interpretations of the testimony get us nowhere, what really happened that night? The answer was still waiting there, either outside the apartment, in the dark paths that led to the beach, or inside the apartment, in a small detail that would give meaning to those minutes. And the investigation was being dragged, with all its weight, towards the next step: the decisions that would determine the fate of the case and the new search strategies. By the second year of the case, Madeleine's disappearance had become one of the most talked about cases not only in Portugal, but throughout Europe. Although the police investigation was officially ongoing, new debates were flaring up in the press and public every week. The Arguido status in particular had left a deep mark on the family. While authorities in Portugal were considering closing the case, public pressure in the UK was keeping the hope alive that Maddie could still be found. During this period, the family developed a new strategy. Accompanied by lawyers and media consultants, they began holding press conferences in various European countries. The Find Madeleine campaign wasn't limited to posters and leaflets. It expanded with websites, radio announcements, and interviews on international television programs. Kate and Jerry repeated the same sentence in front of every camera: Madeleine could still be alive. All it takes is someone who has seen her to speak out. However, this insistence was interpreted differently in some quarters. Some saw this hope as the natural outcome of parental love, while others interpreted it as an inability to accept the facts. This dual perspective on the family became even more pronounced over time. At this point, a striking development occurred. Retired volunteer detectives from the UK launched an independent investigation of the case. They reviewed the Portuguese police's findings, witness testimonies, and timeline, presenting alternative scenarios. According to them, the mystery man who wandered around the apartment complex around midnight had not been taken seriously enough. Several witnesses had described a man wearing a dark jacket, carrying a child in his arms. Although some of these accounts were later weakened on the grounds of misremembering, the volunteer detectives argued that they were a key clue to the abduction hypothesis. The press carried these new interpretations into headlines: mystery man still shrouded in mystery. At the same time, Portuguese authorities officially closed the case. The report, published with the statement "insufficient evidence found," suspended the investigation while failing to fully lift the shadow of suspicion surrounding the family. This decision was met with widespread condemnation in the UK. Tabloid newspapers ran the headline "Justice Stalled." Major media outlets like the BBC were more cautious. The case is closed, but questions remain. At this point, the McCann family made a new move. They established their own private detective team. The aim was to independently pursue leads even if the authorities had closed the case. This team conducted investigations in various countries. Tips received in Spain, Morocco, and even the UK were evaluated. A few witnesses in Morocco, in particular, reported seeing a little blonde girl. Photographs were released to the press. Some genuinely resembled Madeleine, while others merely offered a casual resemblance. Nevertheless, the news instilled hope in the family. Newspapers ran headlines like "Is Maddie in Morocco?" Portuguese authorities, however, argued that such reports were speculation and cautioned against further investigation. The psychological tension within the family grew. Kate frequently wrote lines in her diary beginning with the mother's worst nightmare, while Jerry tried to remain reasonable at every opportunity. Even on camera, the weariness between them was palpable. In one interview, Kate's gaze wandered off into space, while Jerry took long pauses to gather his words, making headlines in the press. Headlines ran, "Mother exhausted, father stubborn." Yet, this was the natural consequence of months of pressure. During this period, British police also decided to become more involved in the case. New witness calls were made, and clues that might have been overlooked were re-examined. A detailed analysis, in particular of phone records, was conducted. Phone calls made during searches of the resort were mapped. It was revealed that some numbers did not belong to the area and that calls were made from SIM cards that had never been used before. However, this information did not lead to a definitive conclusion. Nevertheless, the British police's technical investigation capabilities prevented the case from being completely closed. The public pinned their hopes on these technical reports that new evidence will emerge one day. But despite all these efforts, the same void remained at the center of the story: Madeleine herself. Neither new images, nor DNA samples, nor witness testimony could bring her back. Everything was built on possibilities: a kidnapping, a domestic accident, misguided witness testimony. Each hypothesis opened a new question, but none were definitively resolved. So Episode 7 reminded listeners of the question: will the truth ever emerge, or will this case, like all the other cold cases, be lost to time? By the summer of 2008, Portuguese judicial authorities announced they were closing the case. They declared there was insufficient evidence, and the McCann's arguido official suspect status was revoked. While this decision appeared to reassure the family on paper, it failed to erase the suspicions that had been building up in the public for years. While some whispered, "It's over," it was an accident, a tragedy, a larger segment insisted. Some stones weren't even looked at. For Kate and Jerry, however, it wasn't the case that was closed. As the front door closed, a new avenue of search opened behind them. The suspect label that had limited their campaign was no longer a limitation, and they used it to expand their call to find Madeleine. 2009 to 2010 were 2 years that proved the family hadn't abandoned the scene. The Find Madeleine Fund and campaign website continued to gather tips from Europe to Australia. Conferences were held, public service announcements played on television. Missing persons posters were updated in resorts, and volunteers printed leaflets in new languages. But the fact that the case was closed in Portugal meant that, in practice, most reports received remained untouched by official action. It was at this point that the McCanns issued a clarion call to the British government: "Let our own police review this case from the beginning." In the spring of 2011, the key was set. Operation Grange. A special team was established within Scotland Yard. A core team of investigators experienced in missing children cases and international aid cases, augmented by support analysts and field officers. The goal was to look from scratch timelines, eyewitness accounts, phone traffic, resort service records, petty theft records in the area, rentals in the surrounding area, employee shift rosters, taxi license plates. Everything was to be reassembled on a single schematic. The work undertaken in the first months was a seemingly simple but profound correction to establish a foundation that would weed out conflicting moments and streamline the chronology. Who was around apartment 5A between 7 p.m. and 11:30 p.m. on the night of May 3rd? How often were the baby listening tours between the restaurant and the apartment conducted? Who was the man carrying a child Jane had reported seeing? Phone records, cell towers, roaming logs, the resort security call log, receptionist reminders, all were compiled side by side. The British team reached an unexpected conclusion regarding the stranger carrying a child narrative that had circulated in the media for years. A vacationing father carrying his daughter around the same time, and the matching clothing and position suggested he might have been the one. Thus, an image that had been considered a cornerstone for years was torn from the wall. This wasn't revolutionary in itself, but it silenced the loudest link in the chain. The team turned their attention to another image, the image of a man holding a child, seen late at night in the town center by the Irish Smith family. The way he walked, the way he leaned his head, the way he carried himself. This description, in terms of location and time, distinguished it from the possibility of a vacationing father, and Operation Grange elevated this hotline to possible importance. Simultaneously, cases of petty theft and home invasion in the region were investigated, opportunists picking locks, small rental cars, seasonal workers living alone, daytime electrical and plumbing repairmen, large lines within small crimes, were being sought. By 2013, two parallel movements attracted attention. The first was an extended call conducted by a British team on the Crime Watch program. A reconstruction was broadcast in studio. A striking map of telephone traffic was displaying anonymous calls, groupings of numbers, and IMI records corresponding to specific time periods. The number of reports received after the program was in the hundreds, and some at first glance qualified as serious. The second movement was the reopening of the case by Portuguese authorities. The police prosecution hotline, working with the British, established search areas around Les. In 2014, excavations were carried out in the bush, underground imaging equipment was used, and cadaver dogs were deployed. Pits were dug at the excavation sites, samples were taken, and photographs were taken, and the result was the familiar phrase, "no concrete findings." This emphasis on no concrete findings again was demoralizing to outside observers. For those within the family, it conveyed something else. At least it was now known that the areas were clear. Hope is sometimes not what is seized, but the sum of the eliminated possibilities. Nevertheless, the debates in the British press during those years persisted. Those who asked, "Is public money being wasted?" responded, "This is how cold cases get hot." Kate and Jerry shared their feelings with a measured tone in front of the microphone. "Yes, we're tired, but if we give up, we'd be doing our daughter an injustice." Between 2015 and 2017, the team was downsized, the core of Operation Grange remained, and the analysis and surveillance network was narrowed. Despite this, the case remained intact. On the contrary, the program's broadcast on its 10th anniversary 2017 rekindled the question of things overlooked. During those days, the family repeatedly repeated the phrase, "Madeleine is not a case number." This was both a response to the harsh criticism directed at them and the cold mind that said, "Let it go now." In 2020, German prosecutors appeared before the cameras. A new suspect, Christian B., was officially announced. The man had lived in the Algarve region in 2007, lived in a trailer and house, and had a serious criminal record. It was revealed that a phone number had contacted a cell tower near Praia da Luz that night, and that the number in question was linked to Christian B. The prosecutors declared, "We don't believe Madeleine is alive." This was a sharp blow to the family. Jerry spoke briefly and calmly. "There is no definitive proof that our daughter is dead. We continue to search for her." As the German line expanded, Christian B.'s past was scoured. Campsites, traces of caravans, vehicles he bought and sold, cases of petty theft, broken windows, rusty, disabled locks. In 2022, Portugal declared Christian B. an arguido. In 2023, extensive searches were conducted around the Arade Dam. Samples were collected from the water's edge and bushes. The press ran headlines about critical objects being found. Lab reports weren't released to the public, or those that were released didn't point to a definitive conclusion. Once again, uncertainty won out. Uncertainty, as the years drag on, becomes a tiring climate for the McCanns. This climate had to win, the one blowing inside, within the house. the one blowing outside from all corners of the world. The wind inside was cooler every year on May 12th, Madeleine's birthday. As the number of candles on the cake increased, the question, if he's alive, how old is he now, would quietly take center stage. The wind outside, however, would suddenly pick up with a new tip, a new country, a new "I think I saw him," reminding people of the reality that this family is still searching. The technical steps of Operation Grange were more complex than a documentary could reveal. Analysts redrew the SIM cards, disposable lines, and cell towers that circulated in the region in 2007, along with sectoral angles. Whose phone went dead where that night? Which device cast a brief shadow? Whose number reappeared elsewhere in Europe later? These didn't create a chain, but they did mark nodes. Nodes required a witness who remembered, someone who decided to speak, an interconnection whose conscience ached years later. Meanwhile, other cracks lingered in the shadow of the case. The disorganization of the search and rescue operations in the early days, the security of the surrounding apartment, the quick cleaning of apartment 5A, the endless debates over the cadaver dog's findings, the labyrinth of media-police relations. Who leaked what to whom? These were all details that made one think, if only the first 48 hours were perfect. But in the real world, the first 48 hours are rarely perfect, and this case was no exception. So, what changed after 2020? First, the perpetrator profile debate revolved around a concrete name and a concrete history. Second, international cooperation became practical. Within the triangle of England, Portugal, and Germany, the case progressed not at the pace of a single country, but on a shared timetable. Third, the public sentiment became more attached to the idea that someday someone will talk. The breaking point in such cases can come with a simple phone call, rather than a big piece of evidence. Someone saying, "I can't hold it in anymore." On the family front, the narrative remained the same. Madeleine must be found. The lines quoted from Kate's book still resonated with the same flavor years later. The voice of a mother oscillating between guilt and hope. Jerry's short, measured explanations. The lawyer's deliberate avoidance of outrageous claims. The annual release of the campaign's financial reports. All of this created the impression of an unwavering line. There were still critics. There were also praisers. But the result remained. The file was open. And through all these steps, a single question rose again in the minds of those listening. What really happened in the room that night? Did the door close slowly or slam shut? Was the window ajar beforehand? Or did it open later? Did the baby hear a voice as he left his plastic toys behind? Did a hand reach for a small blanket? Or were all these images the dream-reality refraction of a scene that never existed? Over a decade of investigation, television broadcast, Ray interviews, news suspects, satellite maps, base logs, all of this paints a picture, but there's still a gap in the middle. We write Madeleine in that space, and because we've written her name, the picture remains incomplete. Perhaps the completion of the picture depends on a single sentence from the back of someone's memory, perhaps on a small slip of paper discarded years ago. What we do know is this: the timeline of this case isn't measured by a calendar. It's measured by the moment of decision someone must convince to speak up. Years passed since Madeleine's disappearance, but the case never went away. On the contrary, every year a new allegation, a new breaking news, surfaced for the family. It was a never-ending cycle: hope, disappointment, hope again, and each time it was back to square one. When Portuguese police closed the case in 2008, the McCann family suffered a deep depression. But a few months later, new reports reopened the case. This up and down cycle sent the family on a roller coaster. Kate McCann wrote in her diary, "Every closure freezes my soul. Every opening makes my heart race. But none of them have any real answers." In the UK, the media turned the case into a national obsession. Family photos on holiday, Kate carrying a Bible, Jerry's working hours as a doctor. The family's relationships, everything became a topic of discussion. Some newspapers sold millions of copies with incriminating headlines about the family. Later, when these allegations were revealed to be false, they were forced to apologize. However, the apology didn't heal the wound. The McCanns were divided in the public eye as either unfortunate victims or parents hiding something. In 2011, British Prime Minister David Cameron, unable to withstand public pressure, ordered Scotland Yard to review the case. This investigation, dubbed Operation Grange, began with dozens of detectives reviewing thousands of documents. The British press headlined it New Hope. For the first time, the family received direct support from the highest authority in the state. However, over the years, the investigation shrank. In 2015, the 30-person team was reduced to 10, and in 2019 to just for detectives. The budget became a subject of annual debate. Should this case remain open forever, or should it be closed? The McCann family received hundreds of reports from around the world. A blonde-haired girl was spotted outside a school in Brazil. A photo of a missing child at a train station in India spread. The photo, taken at a hotel in Canada, was shared millions of times online. DNA tests were performed each time, and the result was, it wasn't Madeleine. But these false alarms both kept the family alive and tore them apart again and again. Jerry said in an interview, "We have to investigate every tip. If we ignore it and she turns up, then we are the real culprits." Internet forums and social media, however, created another side to the story. Conspiracy theories ran rampant. Some claimed Madeleine had been taken by an organ mafia. Others claimed the Portuguese police were hiding the truth. More far-fetched theories implicated the British government. These rumors, lacking evidence, spread rapidly, especially among younger generations, and each rumor added new pain to the family. Amidst all this noise, the central question remained, what really happened to Madeleine that night? As the 10th anniversary of Madeleine's disappearance began in 2017, the international press returned to the case. The McCann family appeared on television programs saying, "We believe he will return one day." At the time, Operation Grange was still ongoing, but its dwindling budget had sparked discussions about whether it would be shut down. At this point, a bombshell announcement came in 2020. German prosecutors announced they had identified a new prime suspect. The suspect's name was revealed as Christian Bruckner, or Christian B for short. The 43-year-old man, serving a prison sentence in Germany, had a history of crimes against children and violence. Furthermore, he had been in Portugal in 2007 when Madeleine disappeared. It was even alleged that cell phone signals pointed to him around Praia da Luz that night. German prosecutors were very clear. Madeleine is dead. The suspect in this case is Christian B. This statement made headlines around the world. However, the evidence was not made public. Journalists who followed the case wrote, if they had definitive evidence, the case would have been open long ago. German authorities, however, were cautious. They had some phone records, statements from the suspect's circle of friends, and details of his past crimes. However, these alone were insufficient to prove him worthy in court. Christian B's past was murky. He fled Germany as a child and sought refuge in Portugal, starting with petty crimes and accumulating cases of theft, drug trafficking, and assault. While living in Praia da Luz, he owned a minivan. This vehicle had been seen near the area where Madeleine disappeared in 2007. He was also suspected of an attack on a German woman in 2006. This made him a natural prime suspect. But the problem for the family was this. Over the course of 13 years, dozens of suspects had emerged, dozens of key pieces of evidence had been released, and none had been resolved. This made Kate and Jerry cautious. They told the press, "We know what the German prosecutors are claiming. If it's true, we'll at least get an answer. But we don't have anything definitive, so we continue to hope." In 2021, German police issued a call for new witnesses, vehicles seen in the area that night, phone calls. Christian B's ex-girlfriends all were questioned again, but no charges were filed. The British press ran scathing headlines, "If there's no evidence, why do you say Madeleine is dead?" German prosecutors repeated the same line, "The information we've obtained shows us that Madeleine is not alive." During this period, social media was divided. Some claimed the real killer has been found. Others believed there was another scapegoat, because, looking at the history of the case, every few years a new suspect emerged, and then the case reached a dead end again. In 2022, the budget for Operation Grange in the UK was extended once again. Now only for detectives were working on the case, but the government sent the message: the Madeleine case will not be closed. This kept the family's hope alive, because as long as the case wasn't officially closed, there was always the possibility that a new tip or new technology would open the door. Amidst all these developments, life for the McCann family continued. The twins had grown up and were approaching college age, but every birthday, every family dinner, every holiday was marred by something missing. Kate McCann once said, "Madeleine is still 3 years old to us. We grow older. She stays the same." This statement summarized the most painful truth of the whole story. The intervening years haven't closed the case. On the contrary, the Madeleine McCann case has become an endless enigma in both the legal world and the public. Each new year brings a different kind of hope or disappointment. One day, new DNA technologies are rumored to be available. Another day, photos of children allegedly seen abroad circulate on social media. Each time, the McCann family holds their breath for a moment, then faces disappointment. When Christian B's name was released in 2020, the press reported him as the final suspect. However, without a case, everything for the family remains hanging in the balance. Kate McCann said in an interview, "Sometimes I think, maybe Madeleine is still alive, but German prosecutors say otherwise. Which is the truth for a mother? The answer is always having to carry both at the same time." This sentence captured the full psychological weight of the case. The media has also taken its share over the years. Some newspapers blamed the family, running headlines about negligence. Others highlighted the police's mistakes. When the Netflix documentary was released, millions worldwide began discussing the case anew. But even at the end, there was no answer. Madeleine was still missing today. The Madeleine McCann case remains open in the UK. While Scotland Yard's budget is limited, at least a small team continues to work on the case every year. Portuguese police say they are still open to cooperation. German prosecutors reiterate that Christian B is the primary suspect, but the whereabouts of the little girl, who has been missing since 2007, remain unanswered. For the family, time moves differently. Twins Sean and Amelie are now young adults, but older sister Madeleine remains forever 3 years old. Their childhood was spent in the shadow of a missing sibling. Today, the McCann family still speaks out, campaigns, and says, "We want to know the truth one day." Because no matter the truth, life or death, the unknown is the heaviest burden. From a public perspective, Madeleine's disappearance has become the most notorious unsolved case of the modern era. International police collaborations, media storms, multi-million-pound investigations, yet no conclusions. This has transformed the case from simply a missing child case into a symbol, a confluence of security lapses, judicial errors, media pressure, and tragic coincidences. Perhaps one day, a new technology, a new witness, or a small piece of evidence that emerges unexpectedly will solve this mystery. Perhaps the case will be remembered throughout history as unsolved. But as of today, that white-walled apartment in the Praia da Luz holiday complex remains a symbol of an unforgettable memory. And after all these years, only one sentence remains: Madeleine is still missing. The simple truth lies at the heart of all questions, all theories, and all searches, because sometimes what keeps a case open for years isn't evidence, but undying hope.